Teachers of Reddit who've had students go on to become murderers/violent criminals. Were there any signs they were capable of such things when you taught them? Teacher of middle school here. Had a weird kid. He was nice to everyone, but when nobody was watching he would make his hands into a strangling motion. Sometime in the year we got a pet hamster and somebody could look after it. A week later the hamster was dead with a broken neck. When I asked who it was clear that it was the kid. Because of the way he looked guilty, but I said nothing as I had no evidence. Fast forward 10 years, and it turns out he's in jail. What for? Stabbing a mother of 2 for her purse. I've had one former student tried as an accessory to capital murder and another awaiting trial for capital murder. In both cases the crimes were very violent, all over the news, and in both cases I wasn't that surprised when I heard about it. However, there was no time when I looked at either boy and thought he's going to kill someone someday. What I did think was that they were probably going to pop off to the wrong person at some point and end up in jail or shot. Both boys were very disrespectful to both teachers and other students, could be charming, but had hair-trigger tempers, and had a great dislike of having to follow any rules. However, I have had many students like that grow out of it. I don't look at a student who's a discipline problem and automatically assume he or she will be a murderer. It sucks when it happens, though. Not a teacher, but there was this kid who went to my school all the way from age 5 to age 17. I invited him to a couple of me birthday parties, and this time, at my 10th birthday party he purposely knocked my cake off the table before anyone could have a piece. At my 13th he broke a window and set some paper on fire indoors. Last year he stabbed and killed someone and is now in jail. Lots of my students are in gangs. A few have been arrested for murder and such. Sad to say, but at an inner city school I'm not entirely shocked when kids from our district are in the paper for any sort of crime. The schools try to do something about it when the kids are young, but it's tough when their dad/uncle/neighbors/etc are in gangs. Played D&D with a guy who we eventually found out was a serial killer. Well, not at the time. At the time we played D&D he was secretly just a regular murderer. Then he didn't show up for one game, and we found out that he stabbed a few more people. There was no evil aura that the guy had. Pretty average D&D nerd. But in hindsight there were some weird things about him. That look when he would jokingly say I've killed people for less. I used to work at a boarding school in England. We had a kid named Tom who came from an orphanage. Tom was one of the brightest students I ever taught. To be fair, he was actually one of my favorite students at the time, and I'm quite sure almost all other teachers liked him too. I believed he was one of the kids who would make it in life. Not only because he was a clever student, Tom was able to be very convincing. He had a great influence on other students. But in retrospect I should have seen some signs. Quite often he stayed after class to ask some questions. One of these times Tom showed a great interest in Horcruxes. It's obvious I haven't told him anything about it. New teacher here, and I teach elementary school, so no major crimes yet. But I have had one kid who I swear will be all over the news in the future for something horrendous, be it murder or rape or a school shooting. He had no empathy whatsoever. This in itself is worrying, but there are people with little empathy who turn out fine. Not this kid. He would hurt the little girls in my class just to watch them cry. Whenever it happened, I would rush over to the little girl, or if it was outdoor recess, the staff member outside would, and he would just be standing there staring at her with the weirdest look on his face. Not a smirk, necessarily, but just odd. Most little kids will either run away or try to look innocent if you catch them, but never him. He just didn't give a fuck. I asked him once why he was always so mean to this one sweet little girl in particular. He said she was his favorite. I could barely control my horrified expression. Like I said, he's going to be on the news eventually. I just hope I don't find out what he did. One of my former students made national headlines for biting his newborn baby's nose off. He was a little off in school, got into trouble a lot. I spoke to him about 6 months before it happened, and he seemed to have turned things around in a positive way. I subbed for a home ec cooking class for a couple of weeks. There was one girl who struck me as a bit odd. It's hard to describe, but I got a bad vibe. She got angry very easily, had zero patience, did not respond well to authority, and would threaten anyone who annoyed her. Obnoxious, yes, but I felt like there was more to it. I asked the department head, and she told me this girl, about 16, was kicked out of her old school for getting into physical fights and manipulating another student, a boy with a learning disability, into attempting to stab the teacher. If I see her name crop up in the news in the future, I will not be in the least bit surprised. There are definitely indications that something could be seriously wrong. I had one female student who was obviously giving off signs she was ill. When she was finally diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder at the age of 13, I received a few apologies from colleagues to whom I had expressed concerns about this child. She was expelled in 8th grade for organizing a murder plot against another girl in her class. She tried to get 4 girls to back her up. One of them turned her into administrators the day of the attempted murder. The victim was not stabbed to death as she had planned. She was not charged. Her mother blamed her at. Really? Her mother made a point of bringing her onto campus every day after the expulsion because she had another child at the school. Mom had problems of her own. I had hoped she would not have children. She recently gave birth to a second child. Neither child trapped the man she was trying to get to marry her. She keeps in touch with former students and teachers through Facebook. She doesn't realize we are watching for signs she might harm these children. I had another student ask me for help. He was planning to kill his mother and twin brothers. He was caught by one brother raping and killing a litter of kittens. He was already killing animals and mutilating them regularly. He asked me to help him turn himself in before he started killing people. We had a conversation in which he told me that I was the only adult who had ever been honest with him. I helped him. He has been institutionalized since he was 14. This child ended up in my class after being expelled from another school for bringing a knife to school to kill a girl who said he was ugly. After being suspended for having the knife, he walked to school with a gun intending to shoot the principal. Then he became my student. My father is a principal, and within the last 2 weeks there was a former student. I also knew him, charged with manslaughter. He was drunk and him and a friend were defending themselves where they supposedly held the man's arms behind his back and beat him to the point where he died from head injuries. In school he was always a pest. He was in the office a few times. There were definitely kids worse than him, but he was very cocky and defiant. I personally never expected him capable of anything like this. My father wasn't shocked that he was in trouble with the law, but we never expected anything like this. I taught a high school student that had a lot of impulse control issues. He was labeled EBD, emotional/behavioral disorder, in our special ed program and needed a lot of support. We got along pretty well, and I think deep down he had a good heart, but he would fly into fits of rage when frustrated. After he graduated, I didn't hear anything about him for a year or two. Then I read in the news that he was being charged with second-degree murder. His girlfriend had a 2-year-old, and she left him alone with her child to babysit while she was at work. Apparently the toddler started crying, and he couldn't handle it. He did something to her which fractured her skull. When mom came home, the toddler was non-responsive. She died the next day at the hospital. He's now in prison for the next 20 years. I can't say that I ever thought he would do something this terrible, but I'm not surprised that he wasn't able to handle this situation and lost control. It's so sad because he had so much support at school, but once he left, that was all taken away and he was on his own. I think it's tragic that all of this happened, and I wish there had been more services in place to help him once he graduated. I went to school with a kid since we were 5 until we were 16, and he was a normal kid. He never showed any signs that he was a killer or not. He was just an average teenager. He strangled a 12-year-old girl for her bike when we were 16. It was a huge shock to the town, and he is currently serving jail time for it. Teacher here. A veteran one too. I'm only posting here because finally a serious message can be sent, viewed, and perhaps start a change. I know which kids of mine are going to go down that path. We see this all the time, and us good ones pick up on body language and such because it's an essential and useful tool to use. Anyhow, listen. Just ask the teachers who the troubled kids are and give the public schools the goddamned money and proper support for mental health services in the schools. For all the kids, not just the sick ones either. We can significantly help societies really mend their wounds this way. But guess what? Social services in the schools are amongst the first to be cut. Teachers get cut too. The people that stay and never get cut? That's right. The administration. These schools are being run in a business model right now. People need to wake the fuck up and deal with bullshit like this. It isn't right. Not a teacher, but during my secondary school years there was this one kid in my tutor. Slight bit of an asshole but nothing too dramatic, was also a bit of a class clown at times. I got on with him okay, there was really nothing out of the ordinary. Turns out he ended up stabbing and killing his ex whilst she was at work. I hear he was a druggie as well before it happened. Was utterly shocked by it. My mom taught in a troubled area. Some of what she has told me is scary. Lots of drugs in this area resulting in very disturbed kids. No murderers that I know of, but probably some future ones. One kid, she taught young kids, 7 to 10 years, kept scissor blades in his desk. Others would punch, bite and lash out in violent rages. Very disturbed for being so young. I hate to admit it, but I will check arrest records annually for one of my former students. He hasn't committed a crime that I know of, but I'm fairly certain he will. When he was in middle school, he was caught with hardcore bondage porn. When the school called his mom, she said, "I know, I gave it to him." How else is he supposed to learn about sex? When he was in my class, he would pull down his pants, sit at his desk bare-bottomed, and make lewd motions directed at the girls in class. I would send him to the office, but they would send him back when he told them his pants were too big and he needed a belt. His mom won a lawsuit against the district for discrimination at some point in the past, and they were terrified of her. I like to believe the best in people, but that kid just wasn't right. This was a first for me this summer. A 17-year-old boy in my town was arrested for a string of armed robberies. I taught him when he was 14 to 15 years old. He was a nice kid. I never had disciplinary problems with him, and I recall him being an average student. He did hang out with some douchebags, though, and I think they had too much influence on him. I was very surprised when I heard he was arrested. I've had other students that I suspect might end up in jail. So far I haven't seen them on the news yet. We had a course mate who was intelligent, shy, and nervous. His father was a professor and mother was a teacher. He had a friend. He tried to kill his friend's grandma with a screwdriver. Everything was planned, except that he was not expecting resistance. Did not succeed, and now serving 16 years in jail. My father is a high school guidance counselor. One of his kids was in the news several years ago for killing his parents and dismembering them in the bathtub. He was totally stunned and told me that he never saw any signs in that kid. Serious drug user at the time of the murders. We didn't talk about it other than that one time. There was 2 kids in the year below me, both odd in their own ways. One killed his girlfriend's mother with a screwdriver. Apparently the mother was always trying to split them up. She did something, then one day he snapped. Coincidentally my girlfriend is ex-police and moved into his old house as he was no longer needing it with going to prison. The other guy raped and stabbed his mother, buying himself a one-way ticket to the big house. But in 6th grade I was in a class with a guy who my friend's sister was trying to sleep with. He was 3 to 4 years older than all of us, would shave daily, and have full-in stubble by 7th period. He was an asshole to students and teachers. He was also like 6'4", and wasn't afraid to swing at teachers. In 7th grade he got expelled and arrested for forcing 6th graders to blow him in the bathroom.